Halloween's right around the corner, and I figured what better way to kick off this spooky season than to take a look at a game inspired by one of the forefathers of Gothic horror, Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. Yep, there's an Edgar Allan Poe adventure game. Unfortunately, we won't be playing as the eccentric author, reenacting his tumultuous life, marrying our cousin, and dying under mysterious circumstances, as awesome of an idea as that would be. Probably. Instead, we'll be going through 3 of his more famous works of prose from the perspective of both the victim and the victimizer. Neat concept. So, let's take a look at The Dark Eye. The Dark Eye was developed by Inkscape, who's probably most well remembered for their very first game, Bad Day on the Midway. And we'll get to that one someday. The Dark Eye was released in 1995 to an overwhelming meh from critics and gamers. Although Entertainment Weekly, that paragon of gaming savvy, gave it an A. So, yeah, there you go. In The Dark Eye, you take the role of an unnamed protagonist who's invited to the seaside estate of his uncle, an eccentric painter. This is an original frame narrative that was created for the game, but it takes heavy inspiration from Poe's usual bag of fictional tricks. Upon arriving at the house, you're greeted by,
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
Okay, well, you've kind of forced my hand here, so let's talk about the art style before we go into the story. It really is the thing that sets the game apart. If you played the previously mentioned Bad Day on the Midway, then you'll already have an idea of this game's look. These clay-modeled characters were a feature of that game as well, though here they take on an even more uncanny nature. The clay, puppet-like characters in The Dark Eye are very off-kilter, and often disturbing, especially their little animations. And sometimes they do more exaggerated things. Like, I mean, what is this? A dance party? Anyway, we're let inside the house by this freak of nature who's the butler, and we're free then to wander around. The game is made up of static images, and you use this hand cursor to move about. It has these different animations for turning or interacting with objects, which is a nice touch. It can be a bit finicky though, and you need to keep it slightly away from the edge of the screen when trying to turn, otherwise it won't register your click. Adding further to the uncanniness and creepy vibes of the game, the house looks abandoned at first, with empty rooms, floorboards in disrepair, stains on the walls. There's even a room on the second floor that has an entire wall missing. And what's up with that unnaturally blue sky? It's like a Windows 98 wallpaper. You can't see any ground anywhere either, even on the first floor, making it feel like the house is floating, like you've clearly entered some other reality. It's very effective at drawing you into the world and atmosphere. The house has 3 floors and a basement, but the butler is down there, always telling you to stay out of the cellar. But you can go back there anyway. There's nothing to do here. For now. Then there's this room. Okay. There's no music while wandering the house. You'll just hear your own footsteps on the wooden floorboards. Though there are some musical tracks at certain points, mostly in dramatic moments. They feature bells, violins, pianos. I feel like it creates an atmosphere that aligns with the late Victorian Gothic time period of Poe's writing, which is most likely the time period the frame narrative is supposed to be set in as well, judging by the character's clothing and the technology in the house. You'll find Uncle Edwin in his studio near the entrance of the house, painting.
I'm so glad you came. I find that the pleasant company of my relations calms my nerves.
Uncle Edwin here is voiced by poet and author William S. Burroughs, which is a strange get. Burroughs is probably best known for his novel Naked Lunch, which was adapted into a 1991 film directed by David Cronenberg. You know, the dude who did movies like Videodrome and The Fly.
That's disgusting.
Now, Burroughs was no stranger to performances. Still, voice acting a video game character would have probably seemed a bit out of left field, but it really works. He gives Uncle Edwin the perfect tired, old, yet eccentric quality that he needs to really come alive as a character. There are also some out-of-the-way areas you can explore in the game to find bonus cutscenes with Burroughs reading the Poe short story The Mask of the Red Death, and the poem Annabel Lee, accompanied by some excellent visual design from the Inkscape team. Anyway, I keep getting sidetracked by all this cool shit. After saying hi to Uncle Edwin, you can head upstairs to find your brother Henry and your cousin Elise, Edwin's daughter.
Cousin, you've come. Oh, we're so happy.
Oh, dear brother, delighted to see you. Please, join us.
Elise expresses concern about Uncle Edwin being consumed by his paintings. Then you go play piano.
You play so beautifully.
Who the fuck is clapping? Back downstairs, you sniff some of Uncle Edwin's paint thinner because, hell, weekend with the family, you're going to need to huff some chemicals to get through this.
Careful. I use a special thinner. The fumes can do all sort of damage to you. A painter I knew fairly went mad from it. Poor soul. He scratched out his own eyes in a fit of frenzy. His own eyes.
You don't say.
Just watch that you keep the windows open.
You don't say. After that, you'll fall unconscious and be in a nightmare version of the house. I mean, the place already kind of looked like a nightmare, but now it's completely empty. The sky outside is orange, and there's a sinister whispering as you explore. Finally, we're at the point where Poe's stories come in. As you wander the nightmare house, there are 3 rooms that will take you to a specific Poe story. Edwin's study is Berenice. The upstairs room where Henry and Elise were is the Cask of Amontillado, and the fish room is the Telltale Heart. Each room has 2 interactive items, and the items represent both the victim and the murderer of the story. So you play through these stories from both perspectives, which is kind of neat, since the original stories only showed the narrative through the murderer's eyes. You can interact with these items in whatever order you want to, so there's a degree of freedom in how you experience the game. And that's basically it for gameplay. Choosing which items to interact with and moving around the house are really the only elements here. So yeah, this is a narrative and atmospheric experience more than anything. So spoilers from here on out if you've never read any of these Edgar Allan Poe stories, I guess, or if you don't want the central narrative spoiled. The game has been largely forgotten and isn't available to purchase, but it's playable on modern systems by downloading it from the Collection Chamber. As always, they're saviors when it comes to these old PC games. Link in the description if you want to try it yourself. Also in the description, you'll find a link to my Patreon. You can donate and join these other dungeon dwellers in supporting this channel. You get to watch videos early and get your name in these credits. So, become a dungeon dweller. Join us. Anyway, in my playthrough, I stumbled into Edwin's study first and inspected the birdcage, which leads us into the story of Berenice. The birdcage puts us in the role of the victim of this story, Berenice herself. Ugh, I'm never gonna get used to that. Inside the vanity, Berenice finds a crumpled up note to Eggaus and a letter on the desk addressed to someone named Emily. Cousin Eggaus is mentioned here too. It's kind of hard to make out this chicken scratch, especially at this resolution. Inspecting the medicine on the desk will trigger a doctor's voice explaining that Berenice has some kind of affliction that requires bed rest. So she takes a big old slurp of medicine and is on her way. Also on the desk is this creepy ass photo and a book that's got a bonus Edgar Allan Poe poem inside, To Helen. Neat. When Berenice gets in bed, Catherine the maid comes in to check on her.
Good morning, miss. I thought I'd look in to see if you're feeling something better.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. Yes, miss.
And now we can leave the room. Downstairs, in the only other accessible room, we meet cousin Eggaus in his study. And out of the clear blue,
Berenice, will you marry me?
Aegeus.
oh, Aegeus. Okay. Well, don't I feel like a piece of shit.
Oh, Aegeus. Of course I will.
Fetch the doctor. Find her medicine.
So after a few days of rest, Berenice is up and about, writing another letter to Emily, and starts to doubt Aegeus' proposal. After that, Catherine busts in and shows off her moves. No, enough of that. Then Berenice goes to visit Aegeus again, and then he starts in with the dancing. Stop that.
Aegeus. Darling. Oh, you're occupied.
Yeah, that's what that is. When Berenice leaves Aegeus' room, her vision gets fuzzy. I don't know, maybe she got the vapors from his sick moves, but she fumbles the medicine.
My medicine.
Berenice then wakes up in a coffin, with the only option being to bang on the lid.
Thank God.
We come to back in Uncle Edwin's study and find that the painting on the floor has changed. Edwin explains it's a portrait of his mother. This portrait will change every time we come back from a Poe short story. Upstairs we find Henry in his room, who tells us he wants to marry Elise. Really, bro? From the note that Henry leaves, we find that Elise is flattered, but also a bit unsure, so she's spending time alone. Edwin isn't too happy when Henry tries to ask permission to marry her.
I won't hear of it. I simply won't hear of it.
Edwin, please, see reason.
She's far too young for you, for any man. Are you insane? She's your cousin, for God's sake.
Yeah, dude, seriously. After this scene, we're transported to the Nightmare House again. So let's head to Edwin's study and this time inspect the knife on the desk to get Aegeus' side of the story. This is the perspective that the Poe story Berenice takes, so we get a lot of excerpts taken from the narrative itself. Aegeus was attracted to Berenice when she was young and beautiful, but then she became ill and now she disgusts him, and he begins to think that he never really loved her at all. Aegeus also has a few screws loose. He spends all day in his family library being distracted by random objects and shadows on the walls and floors, sometimes for the entire day. Berenice comes in, just like in her side of the story, and asks Aegeus to take a stroll with her. Here we get a close-up of Berenice's face with strange images in her eyes. I actually missed this bit in Berenice's scenario because I didn't click on Aegeus when this little bell-chiming jingle started. This is a timed thing, and if you click on the other character's eyes, you'll then be transported into their scenario. Now, this is kind of neat because you have a chance to play different parts of the scenarios at different times. Every story has a moment like this where you'll be allowed to jump into the other character's perspective. It also lines up pretty well with the Poe source material. If you've ever read any of the short stories or poetry, you'll know that he often focuses in on his character's eyes to hint at their mental state, and the game zeroes in on this during these moments. However, it's not so great when you've already completed that character's side of the story, because then you have to play through it again and wait until you get to the point in the story when you can jump back or finish it. Also, this is a good time to mention that when you open the menu, you have this head map thing. The eye represents the player character in the Uncle Edwin story, and then there are images that relate to each character's scenario in the Poe stories. However, clicking on an already completed scenario will send you into that scenario, and there's no way to open up the map and jump back to the scenario you came from until you finish the scenario you've jumped into. I hope that makes sense. It's a bit confusing, but it's something I found out the hard way, because I had to play through Berenice's scenario 3 times, and no, nothing changes on repeat playthroughs. So don't click the character's eyes, and don't mess with the head map. Anyway, Aegeus asks Berenice to marry him, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and the game doesn't provide context, but if you've read the short story, you find out that he does it really just to fuck with her. From the original story. Now I shuddered in her presence, and grew pale at her approach. Yet bitterly lamenting her fallen and desolate condition, I called to mind that she had loved me long, and in an evil moment, I spoke to her of marriage. We also understand a bit more of what was going on when she came in, and he just started gyrating. He gets distracted by her sickly face, and specifically her teeth. She leaves, and Aegeus starts losing it. Eventually, you'll start hearing the word teeth, and start seeing teeth.
Teeth. Teeth. Teeth. Teeth. Teeth. Teeth. Teeth.
The portrait of Aegeus' father will change. So will the bust in the corner of the room. Finally, Aegeus finds out Berenice has died.
I can scarce say it. She is no more.
We don't get to see what happens next. Then we're back in Aegeus' study.
My lord, a cry in the dead of night. We went in search. Oh, my lord, her grave disturbed, sir. Her enshrouded body, bloody, yet still breathing. Oh, yes, alive. Oh, sir, look.
And Aegeus has bloody hands, along with a dirty shovel near the fireplace, and the strange box on the desk we couldn't investigate earlier, filled with teeth. Back at Uncle Edwin's, he's fiddling with a lamp. You're not putting paint thinner in that lamp, are you, Uncle?
Your brother has dishonored your name, seducing his cousin still in her minority. Once the dread mark is made, it cannot be struck out. We avoid complete disgrace only by taking immediate action. Immediate action.
Yeah, that's not suspicious at all. We find Elise up in the piano room, and she's pretty upset about not being able to talk to Henry, so she asks us to pass him a note. And yeah, screw that old fart, I'll do it. But first, why don't I play some piano?
Blood.
That's probably not good. And now we're back in the nightmare house. So let's take a look at this wine bottle over here on the table. Here we take the role of Montresor, who wants revenge on his once friend Fortunato. So we get to wander around this Italian city at night during a masquerade, which is a cool setting. The best thing about the Dark Eyes retelling of the Cask of Amontillado is that we get more of an idea of what it is Fortunato has done that makes Montresor want to kill him. In the original story, it's left up to the imagination, but in the game, Montresor hints that Fortunato slept with his wife. Anyway, Montresor lures Fortunato away from the revelry on the streets with the promise of a very expensive wine, the Amontillado.
But I have my doubts.
Amontillado?
But I have my doubts. Lucchese has a discerning palate. Perhaps he could take a sip.
Bah, Lucchese can't tell Amontillado from gutter water.
So Montresor leads Fortunato back to his villa, and they head to the catacombs underneath a house where Montresor has stored the Amontillado, all the while feigning concern over Fortunato's health, knowing that it will only spur Fortunato onward. And damn, Fortunato, yeah, this looks like a place I'd want to be alone with the guy whose wife I slept with. Anyway, Montresor gets Fortunato tipsy on some other wine and leads him further into the catacombs to a small alcove where he promises the Amontillado is kept. Then he chains him to the wall and starts bricking him in there. So as Montresor, we're forced to build up the wall brick by brick, row by row, as Fortunato cries out helplessly.
For the love of God, Montresor!
Yes, for the love of God.
Then we just leave him there and exit the catacombs. Peace out, Fortunato. Back at Uncle Edwin's, we take Elise's note to Henry, which sets him on a path to running away with Elise.
We must take Elise from this dark place. You, my brother, you must help me.
All right, dude, just back up a pace.
The mistress Elise is no more. She is dead.
Yeah, we got it the first time, thanks. Investigating Elise's room, we find Edwin putting on his best grief-stricken performance. Edwin does a solid and lets Henry sit with Elise for the night, but he tells us to grab the lantern that he was fiddling with earlier, to give him some light while he is spending his vigil. Oh, you mean that one that you didn't fill with paint thinner? Right. So we get the lamp and bring it back, then follow Edwin out of the room. Time for another nightmare trip. Let's see how things go from Fortunato's point of view in the Cask of Amontillado. Things start pretty similarly as we go with Montresor back to the catacombs and follow the path through. Fortunato's dumbass wanders into the alcove, and we get to watch as Montresor bricks us in.
Joke. An excellent joke. We'll have many laughs about it at Palazzo over some wine.
The Amontillado.
Yes. The Amontillado.
We see this time that there's also a skeleton down here, and this triggers a memory of a woman whom we can only assume is Montresor's wife. This is another touch that isn't in the original story. And so yeah, Fortunato's bricked in, his wife and child flash before his eyes, and that's it. The screen fades and he's left there to die. Once again, back at Edwin's, they've sealed up Elise's coffin and are putting her in the cellar vault because, as Edwin says, the ground outside is too marshy for a burial.
Come now. Peace be with her.
I can't bear to leave her here, all alone in the dark. Dear brother, do leave the lantern. Leave her a small source of light. We'll go back in the darkness.
So we leave the lantern and head out, which once again drops us into the nightmare house. If we turn around and head into the vault, we find a large throne room. Going closer to the throne kicks off one of the bonus stories, which is a retelling of the Mask of the Red Death. It's the entire story, too, read by William S. Burroughs, and has some pretty cool visuals to back it up. Also, while in the nightmare house, if you head up to the second floor where the room with no wall is and you look out into the sky, you'll get a reading of the poem Annabel Lee. But anyway, in the nightmare house, we can head upstairs and check out that fish table to experience the last Poe story, The Telltale Heart. The fisheye puts us in the role of the old man of the story. We wander around the apartment thinking about how strange the young man who lives with us is. On the kitchen table, you can find a newspaper article that gives you a summary of another Poe story, The Premature Burial, which also may be a callback to the Berenice story, and possibly some foreshadowing. There's not a whole lot to the old man's side of the story. We eat some soup, hum to ourselves, look at all the crap we've collected over the years. You know, old man shit. Eventually, the young man will come home. We sit down and eat some more soup. Then head to bed. After this weird sequence with some images floating in front of us, which is probably meant to represent a dream, we wake up to see someone approach us in our room with a lantern.
Who's there? What could it be? Someone?
And that's a wrap for the old man. Meanwhile, back at Uncle Edwin's, we find Henry in the sky room, hanging out. He believes Elise is still alive. Edwin tells us Henry has lost his mind. He also knows we took notes between Elise and Henry, so he tells us to take one that he's written.
He believes Elise to be alive. Let him receive a letter from her. Deliver him this message. Let him believe it to be from Elise. Let him read by her own hand that she is no more.
So we take the letter to Henry, who reads that Elise will meet him on the cliff outside. So we run after him and get this pretty amazing shot of what this area surrounding the house looks like. Anyway, Henry's gone full-on madman, shouting from the cliff when a huge wave crashes against it. And somehow Henry survived that, but he ain't gonna survive getting thrown off the cliff by the butler. When we turn back to the house, we find Edwin, who tells us that Henry was driven mad by the paint thinner fumes in the lantern. I fucking knew it. However, Edwin turns his wrath against us now, and we get sent back to the nightmare house again. Let's check on that butcher's knife. This puts us in the role of the young man in the Telltale Heart story. As we wander the apartment this time, we get the thoughts of the young man and his desire to kill the old man who lives with him. After exiting our own room, we find the old man sitting at the kitchen table, and he doesn't really do anything except offer us some soup.
What is it? What is it about him that makes my blood run cold?
Eventually, the old man goes to bed, so we have to check the clock until midnight. Then we head down the hall and grab the lamp and enter the old man's room. And the first night is pretty innocent, just watching an old man sleep. You know how it be. Things escalate the second night, though.
Who's there? His heart will burst. Surely it will burst. There. No more.
Well, better grab that saw.
I worked hastily, but in silence. I dismembered the corpse.
And don't forget to hide all the pieces under the floorboards. Later on, the police arrive. The young man invites them in and even takes them to the old man's bedroom. He gloats in his own head about the fact that the police don't suspect anything, has them sit down and chat. But as they converse, the young man begins to hear the heartbeat of the old man until he can't stand it anymore.
Stop! Stop! I admit it. I confess. Tear up the planks. Here. Here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.
This time we come to in the throne room, and as we try to exit, we end up wandering through scenes from all of the stories that we've experienced, until we find ourselves walled up like Fortunato. Luckily, someone has left us a pickaxe. We break down the wall and end up in the vault. Elise is in fact still alive and has broken out of her coffin, though she's also clawed her own eyes out in the process.
the madness-inducing fumes, Henry's premonitions. All these came clear to me at once, and I could feel and hear a great rending, as of a mirror breaking, roll throughout the house, growing in volume and strength. And even as I looked on, the house around us, the vault, the lantern, Elise, her bloody eyes, all shattered into 100,000 shards, shattered as did the dark depths of my very soul.
And that's The Dark Eye. Not much in the gameplay department, but in terms of art direction, story, and atmosphere, it's a sweet little gem of a lost horror game. I think the way they reinterpreted the Berenice story was the best of the three. There were different environments there, and you got to see a lot more of Berenice's thoughts and feelings in this story. The other two, while it was interesting to see the other characters' perspective, they all followed the same general format and were in the same environments. But still, it's an interesting effort and definitely a classic spooky experience. Anyway, that's it for this video. Once again, check the description for a link to the collection chamber where you can download this game for yourself if you want to. There's also a link to my Twitter and Patreon. If you like what I do here, please consider supporting the channel, like these dungeon architects: Benifer94, Caleb, and Izzy Lexus, as well as these dungeon connoisseurs: Crippler Jones, Joshua Weber, Mr. Independent, Old Dead Lemons, True Axiom, Warrior Song, and Where Am I? Help. Thanks for the support. And thank you for watching. More horror games are coming, so until next time, The Dark Eye, check it out. Dungeon Chill, out.